right about the time I realized Krista knew about my son and I being tortured, I think that was when what she used to determine whether or not she was going to keep talking to me or not, and how much I knew about her. I believe she already had an idea that I might have an idea, even in Oregon, but I think based on the way that she and her boyfriend Ryan Barnes treated me at this one supper before I went to, before I moved, after I had reported the FBI agents, but before I had completely really been blocked to live in Washington State, when she was making fun of me while she thought I was intoxicated with Ryan, I knew that she felt fairly confident that her secrets were safe at that time. But at any rate, then I think when she found out, when I was emailing these lawyers who she was connected to, when I was emailing them saying I know that my migraines aren't natural, and they were triggered specifically on court dates to give you a legal advantage, and when I was telling people how I had figured out that I didn't have natural migraines and they were triggered by Department of Defense or whatever, I keep saying whatever, but I knew at that point, when I was saying I told somebody when a false date of when my periods were occurring and that my period times had changed, she had to have known. I'm sure it got back to her that I was saying that, and she knew the only person that I was talking to about my periods would be her. So before my son was ever born, she already had an idea that I had lied to her. And why would I lie to her unless she knew that I might have an idea about her? I mean, maybe I think that I did say in an email to make it sound that it wasn't her, just her, that I talked with several different people about having a different period date, but I hadn't really. The only person I talked to was her. But she didn't know that. She didn't know if maybe I was saying that, giving wrong period information to other people as well. So she didn't probably know. She might have been worried, but she didn't know for sure that that I was lying to her only, and that I didn't trust her at that point. So then I had my son, and she got mad at me, and she was extremely upset, and said, did you know and just not tell me that you were having a boy instead of a girl? She was like accusing me, and she was very angry that she acted like I'd lied to her. And I said, no, I really didn't know, which was true. But again, why would she be upset unless it ruined some kind of a plan that was already hatched? So then when she did catch me lying was when she knew that my son and I were being tortured. And she made sure that torture stopped. And then she called up out of the blue and said, hi, how are you? I just want to know, is everything fine now with you and your son, right? Everything's fine now, right? And I lied and said, no, it's still happening. And it hadn't happened at all for that 1 week. So then she got a weird tone in her voice and was angry at me again, and then hung up, and that was pretty much one of the last times I ever talked to her. I believe it was the last time I talked to her. She didn't call again. And at that point, how would she know that I was lying unless she knew that my son and I were being tortured? So if she knew that I was lying because she knew we were being tortured, that was then her idea of feeling that, well, Cameo lied to me about that, so maybe she did lie about these other things and she's lying to me. So she probably had an idea by then that I didn't trust her. And she maybe did not want to keep talking to me when I already was fairly sure about that. I think that I still played a game of pretending I didn't know. And I sent her email about my son and how my son was doing in his development, that kind of thing. You know, I sent email to her, I copied Robin Bechtold, told my mom. Those emails were not just going to just one person, they mainly went to my mother. But a few things went to a lot of people because I was, you know, proud of my son, and it's kind of like a newsletter. And anyway, after that 1 week of not having any torture, the minute I said against me and my son at night, in that same way, which was, it wasn't like, I mean, it was severe. There was no way you couldn't notice it, and there was no way that I couldn't notice this happening to my son. So there was 1 week of not having that happen at night. And then right after I told her, yes, it was still happening, like that very night, they started doing it again. And I say they as in NASA / Department of Defense, aerospace defense industry, and, you know, military, whatever, combined. The other individuals that might have a connection with Krista is possibly this one, as I said, Italian-American man who got close to my cousin Shar Garrett in Spokane, Washington. And she became pregnant, had a child named Callie. She came out to visit me and my son while we still lived on Methow, before we were being tortured, while my son was still pretty young. He was a baby. Or a toddler, you know, he's very, very small. And I didn't really think about the fact that that person that she had Callie with was potentially an adversary and had gotten into the family by knowing through Krista who my family was. And I was already in the middle of litigation and some other problems at the time. So she broke up with him for whatever reason, or they split up. But she was then living right next to someone by the name of Mike Killian, who was working for Goodrich, B.F. Goodrich, which I thought was a tire place, but it's aerospace defense industry. And the thing that's a little bit weird about Killian, aside from the fact that he works for the aerospace industry, was his name. I mean, Killian, like Killian's beer, like the dark horse on the bottle label, was almost like a joke, because I had told Krista and nobody else about this one impression I had one time of a dark horse on a hill with like maybe a knight on it, but I couldn't tell because it was like a shadow. She was very, very interested in that information. And then after I say this to Krista in 2003, because I remember I was living when I told her this. I remember the location. We were at my house when I told her this. So right about that time, then my cousin is living next door to a guy named Killian. You know, like the dark horse and the Killian's beer. And he works for the BF aerospace defense industry, which does defense work from space for the government, and which is a company that was headed by a Roman Catholic. So to me, she was involved with him before anything happened to me and my son. So I just think that some of my family members ended up getting connected inadvertently to people that were not friends of my son and I. And then it became a strange romantic entanglement that is really difficult to disengage from. because basically they married in my family to the enemy. So, which is also, by the way, an idea that, well, that's a longer story. So, going back to the torture, my son and I were then tortured every single night, and it affected our feet. Our feet started to curl under and cramp. And my son was never able to speak in the same way from that point. I mean, he was always trying to speak. It wasn't like I traumatized him and he couldn't speak anymore, or he was mute. It was that he was always trying to speak, and he was always verbalizing and vocalizing, but he couldn't organize his thoughts or his words in the same way anymore because of what had happened to him, probably at the hospital with Dr. Butler in the opposite room. And if not that, it was the impact that occurred to both me and my son at the same time, which I don't think that would have done it because it didn't change my thinking or speaking abilities in any way. So then, he was targeted with this technology at high levels while he was just a baby. He was about 9 months old at the time or so. And it was every single night. I remember wondering if it was neighbors and really not knowing who it was. All the neighbors around us seemed to be like the same neighbors as before. I didn't know if some of them hated me now because they thought I was, they'd heard something bad, so they hated me. I didn't know if police knew somebody and had given someone technology. I kind of wondered about the people who lived beneath us, if they could do anything from where they were. And there were new neighbors across the street, and one of them carried like some kind of a Nazi flag, and kind of a bunch of young punk white guys, very young. And then they ended up moving. About the time that my son and I were going to be moving to East Wenatchee. So, I mean, I kind of wondered at that too, but really it comes down to it more like aerospace, defense, and the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, military. That's what it comes down to. And the Department of Justice would have to know about it in some way. At some point, at some level, they have to know about it. So, at the same time that my son and I were being tortured every night to where we couldn't sleep and causing a lot of stress and pain, that was about the time that Washington State decided to stiff me on that check, on refunding my money, when they told me to go to the hospital and to medical appointments. But then they decided to not reimburse me as they had agreed to. So I was then facing an eviction. We weren't treated for the thrush or anything, ever. When we had insurance for it, I went to other doctors in the whole area, and I asked other doctors to treat us, and they refused. They said, if you don't have a primary care doctor, we can't treat you. And then I was being banned. My son and I were being banned. They even banned my son. They wouldn't treat my son. They said, if you're banned from these clinics, you can't get any care for yourself or your son. And I tried to get treatment for myself and my son at the University of Washington Hospital and told them about it, and they didn't do anything either. The next thing is that I was facing an eviction because I couldn't pay my rent because the state had not given me the refund check that they had said they would be paying me. So I believe the next thing that happened is I was at the hospital and took my son. Actually, I believe, well, then I was looking for a place to live, and nobody would rent to me. And there was this, hang on just one second.